Foundations Live. Foundations Live. Foundations Live.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's Foundations Live. I am Paul, and very good to see you this afternoon. I was enjoying that so much we had it twice. So welcome to this afternoon's Foundations Live. We've got three guests with us today. We're going to hear from today's mostly around adaptations in the private rented sector. So we've got Mira Chindaroyas from the National Residential Landlords Association, who's recently published some new guidance around adaptations in the private rented sector. I've got Guy Harris from Accessible PRS, who's going to talk about some new rate, or I suppose how to describe them, but I suppose kind of new listing options for estate agents around accessibility and homes. And Stuart Fern joining us again from AKW to talk around some of their adaptations that can work in the private rented sector. So we'll be hearing from them as we go through the afternoon.
Foundations Live.
So to start with, I'll just give a run through of how this all works if you're new to Foundations Live. So Foundations is the national body for disabled facilities grants and home improvement agencies in England, and we're funded by the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities. So we're here to help with training events, workshops, and all sorts of information around disabled facilities grants and home improvement agencies. You can find all the details at foundations.uk.com. As well as watching today's Foundations Live on our website, you can also watch it across a range of social media. I'm not quite sure if Facebook's playing with us today, but on LinkedIn, YouTube, and on Twitter, you'll be able to find a live stream of today's event. And if you need closed captions, they're also available on LinkedIn and YouTube if you want to watch them there. So our agenda for today, as I mentioned, is mostly around the private rented sector. So we'll be hearing from the National Residential Landlords Association, Accessible PRS and AKW. And then at the end of today's webinar, on today's Foundations Live, I'm going to go through a new page that we've got in the library section of the website that's got a new resource around DFG case law. So I'll be going through the six bits of legislation, 6 cases that have been to the kind of High Court or for judicial review, and outlining what you need to know about those. So, and just a kind of a plug for if you're looking for any information on how to run your home improvement agency or DFG service, you can find about 30 different guides at foundations.uk.com/guides. So one of the other things that we're doing just a little bit later this year, so in June, we're going to be running a special summit around DFGs for children. So the event will be on the 27th of June in central Birmingham, almost literally a stone's throw from Birmingham New Street Station. And it's going to be focusing on the kind of various aspects of difficulty around providing DFGs for children. So it's a special full-day event where we're going to be looking at some of the key and kind of thorny issues around DFGs for children, hopefully coming up with some solutions. Sponsored by AKW Contour, who are very pleased that they're kind of supporting our summit again for the second year. Tickets are now open. In fact, I will add a QR code in the corner of the screen there if you wanted to book the tickets, and hopefully Dan will pop the link in the chat as well. If you do want to pay kind of by invoice or offline, there is an option to do that. If you go through the booking process and tick that you'd like an invoice to be sent to you, then that kind of automatically sends an invoice. We also follow up with an email. So in case you need to add a PO number to that, we follow up with an email to get those details off you. So it's hopefully made it as straightforward as possible if you'd like to book and pay offline for that. Tickets are going very well, kind of more than half gone already. So if you want to join us in June for the Children's Summit, we'll be in central Birmingham on the 27th. Right, so on to private rented sector. So as I mentioned at the start, very pleased to have Mira from the National Residential Landlords Association with us today, who have recently published a new report that I suppose is going to follow up to a previous report on adaptations in the private rented sector. So Mira's joined us today to give us that update. So over to you, Mira.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you everyone for welcoming me today. So I wanted to give you an update on some of the research that we're doing on adaptations, but also a plug for, as Paul said, the new fact finder which we've published with the support of foundations that supports landlords to access the disabled facilities grant. So I will pop that link in the chat now before I forget. So you can access it at the end of the session. But Paul, next slide, please. So firstly, just to let you know about the NRLA. We are the UK's largest membership organisation for private residential landlords, with over 100,000 members, ranging from those who let one or two properties to full-time landlords with large property portfolios. We support our members with a wide range of services, including a free advice line, training, landlord meetings, industry support, resources such as tenancy agreements and guidance, including our guidance on adaptations and exclusive discounts and partnerships. And we also do policy campaigning on behalf of our members. Our vision is a rental sector that works for all. So that means everyone that lives and works in the PRS. And we have been working on adaptations for around 5 years now, almost, and published our initial guidance back in 2021, which is aimed at landlords and tenants to support them to navigate the process of adapting properties where there's a need to do so. Next slide, please. So the NRLA often surveys our members around a number of different policy issues, and we have recently completed a new survey around adaptations and accessibility in the private renter sector. So this was at the end of last year, we surveyed just over 700 landlords and did some comparison with the survey that we'd done in 2021 to see how things had moved in that time. The key area where there hasn't been much movement is that the same sort of proportion of landlords are letting to tenants with accessibility needs. So around 7% of our members do so, and that hasn't really shifted in the past couple of years. But we know that there is a demographic change happening within the sector, and there are more older people living in the sector, requiring a higher number of adapted properties, and that proportion is going to increase in the coming years. So really it's key that landlords are ready for those changes and aware of the issues around adaptations, so that they can be best placed to support their tenants when and if they need adaptations in their properties. Next slide, please. So we were quite pleased to see that there was some shift in the proportion of landlords who are aware of the existence of disabled facilities grants. Just under 2/3 of landlords were unaware, but this was an improvement from the 2021 levels, where 78% of landlords were unaware of DFGs. So we're seeing that there is an increase in awareness gradually across the landlord cohort. Next slide, please. Amongst the landlords that were aware of the DFGs, just 1% had indicated that they've used them. And that contrasts with 17% who stated that they were aware but hadn't used them, and further 18% who had some awareness but were not sure how it works. So I think that the key challenge that we have seen when we've been engaging with local authorities is that landlords aren't really accessing DFGs, even where and private tenants aren't either, even where there is a possibility of there being DFGs being suited, or other types of grants that might be available within the sector. Next slide, please. We asked landlords about how willing they would be to install minor, moderate, or major adaptations in their rental properties, and really this chart shows how that willingness changes quite significantly depending on the extent to which the adaptation is going to have a big impact on the property. Nearly 2/3 of landlords indicated that they were likely or very likely to consider installing minor adaptations, but substantial proportion of landlords were unlikely or very unlikely to consider installing major adaptations, 71%. However, we know from our work that the majority of adaptations for properties are minor adaptations. So there is a communication issue around landlords' understanding of what kind of adaptations tenants may be asking for, and also around how those adaptations could be suited to a wide range of tenants, that the adaptations don't need to be removed necessarily at the end of the tenancy, but they can be installed in a way that is suited for all different types of tenants, and make that property an accessible property for a wide range of tenants in the future. Next slide, please. We also explored what barriers landlords would see there being to installing adaptations, and we asked landlords to consider or to identify up to 3 that they considered would be a barrier for them. Almost 1/3 of landlords pointed to the lack of demand for adapted properties as a noteworthy barrier. But interestingly, lack of demand had been the highest ranked barrier in 2021, with 56% indicating that this was a key barrier for them. So we potentially are seeing that landlords are recognising that there is a shifting change within the sector in terms of the demand from tenants. Just over a fifth of landlords were concerned about potential income loss during the installation of adaptations, and this is a significant drop from 2021, where it was almost 50% of landlords identifying this as a significant barrier. So again, we're seeing a shift in perception around adaptations, which is helpful for the work that we're doing in supporting landlords to adapt their properties. However, the two kind of key barriers for landlords around the cost of undertaking the works and the cost and time of removing the adaptations were again around 50%, which was similar to the 2021 survey stats, and is a significant area where we can work to support landlords to recognise that those adaptations don't need to be removed at the end of the tenancy, and also that there's support available for the cost of undertaking the works, and that it's not the landlords themselves that has to bear that cost. Next slide, please. The survey also asked landlords what interventions may make a difference to them to make them more likely to adapt their properties or to offer more of their portfolio to tenants who need adapted properties. And again, ask them to select up to 3 solutions that would make a difference. 70% of landlords would be willing to adapt their properties, and over half indicated that they would be more willing if they would have more certainty that the property would be returned to them in its original condition prior to its original condition that had been prior to installing the adaptation. Almost half suggested that a guaranteed rent was a key motivator in considering property adaptations. So that's something that we've been working on in terms of where there may be possibilities of having long lease schemes that are working specifically with adapted properties in local authority areas. And a further 35% identified the assurance of guaranteed future tenants as a factor which would enhance their willingness to make adaptations. And you may be aware that there's a big renters reform bill going through Parliament at the moment that involves one aspect being a property portal whereby properties let in the private rented sector would be registered. So that could be an opportunity for us to identify a way of identifying those properties which do have adapted features and making it easier for local authorities to match tenants to the properties that are available in their area. Next slide, please. So what's next from the NRLA? We are conducting focus groups at the moment to explore in more detail the findings from the surveys, the recent survey, and particularly looking at financial incentives. One of the findings from the survey was that the DFG in itself may not be sufficient, but further financial incentives may support landlords or encourage landlords to adapt their properties. So things like preferential mortgage rates or council tax exemptions during voids are areas of policy that we're exploring at the moment. We're also looking to refresh our guidance, and the fact finder is the first stage in that, but we will be reviewing our bigger piece of guidance as well. We're creating an interactive house to be hosted on our websites to support landlords to see what kind of adaptations they may be able to make to their property. And we're doing further research on long-term changes in the sector and making the case to landlords for adapting their property, or for being able to adapt their properties in order to future-proof for the changes in the demographics that we are seeing. And finally, we are looking to develop partnerships with more service providers who'll be able to support landlords to adapt properties, and particularly adaptations which look more attractive than the traditional view of sort of clinical adaptations, and which would be able to remain in situ in the property long term. The research that I've discussed is available on our website, and the link is there should you want to read it. Next slide, please. So if you'd like to download our guidance or the fact finder, I've popped the fact finder link in the chat, but it's also available on our campaigns page, and I'm very happy to take any questions, or please feel free to email me if you want more information.
Great, thank you, Mira. I think it's some of those statistics show things are definitely moving in the right direction, aren't they, in terms of kind of attitudes and understanding around DFG. So it looks like kind of the first report has been certainly well received and understood by the sector. Is that kind of your feeling as well?
Yeah, I think the challenge that we are trying to address with the next phase of the campaign is really that if you haven't had experience with a tenant who needs adaptations, or you haven't had sort of personal experience with it, then you might not necessarily look for the information. So it's really about trying to access those landlords who, once they hear about the idea, are open to it, but might not proactively click on something. So that's where we're trying to get to, because I think that the willingness is there within the sector. It's about raising the awareness and helping people to see that there is value in preparing for adaptations, even if they don't currently have tenants who need them.
Yes, because I suppose kind of with the aging demographic, and it kind of did you have kind of statistics in terms of the kind of demographics of the private rented sector and how that's changing as well? Does that kind of feed into it in terms of perhaps kind of more older people using the private rented sector as kind of a...
Yes, I don't have the exact statistics in front of me, but yes, we do. There's been some research. I think there was some recent research from one of the parliamentary groups which showed that the ageing profile of the private rented sector, and that's going to increase in the next few decades. So it's something which I think landlords are going to be increasingly facing, even if they're not right at this moment. And that's something that we are doing some work on as a bigger campaign, looking ahead to what the private renter sector will be looking like in sort of 25 years time, and how it needs to be prepared for that. So adaptations is definitely a key area that we are focusing on as part of that campaign as well.
Yeah. But do you see it as a question from Penelope there, but in terms of the kind of approach, I suppose there could be either I suppose kind of a stick approach from the Equality and Human Rights Commission potentially around if kind of landlords don't support adaptations, but it kind of looks from the report that perhaps more of the kind of carrot approach in terms of incentives seems to be the way to go. Would you kind of see that as a positive approach?
Yeah, I think, I mean, landlords have a quality duty anyway, so they mustn't discriminate against tenants on the basis of their disability. But the requirement is that they consider, or they don't unreasonably reject an approach to adapt a property. Obviously, where there's more major works done to a property, can be more challenging. So I think it's around showing landlords how actually that isn't about necessarily an individual tenant, or only just about an individual tenant. It can be something that's positive for them going forward, and for their property, and making it accessible to a wider range of people. And I think taking that approach and sort of making the business case for it to landlords is really the way to change minds on that.
Yes, yeah. And we've just had the DFG data from 2022-23, and the kind of proportion going to the private rented sector was still around kind of 7 or 8%. but it's I suppose if more landlords are aware of it, then potentially, do you think that could increase, or do you think there are any other what would help more landlords, I suppose, kind of take up the option of DFG for their tenants?
I think there's a few areas, definitely this sort of awareness of it, but also landlords have concerns about how the works are done, using their own tradespeople to install works, for example, or being able to choose the kinds of adaptations that are put into the property, whether they want to top up the DFG in order to get something that is more appealing to them.
Yeah.
So those sorts of elements are things which we have included in our guidance that landlords and may not be aware of when they're first approached, but which make the process more appealing to landlords because they have a little bit more control over it. I think there can be a concern that something's going to be changed to their property and they don't have that kind of control over what those changes are and how it's going to look.
Yeah, I think we see something similar with social landlords as well in terms of that level of control. Just a question from Judith around post-adaptation. Do you see kind of landlords increasing rent or not?
That's not something that we've seen specifically. I think that the benefit for landlords of adapting the properties in terms of the tenancy is that disabled tenants who have an adapted property will often want to stay in that property for a longer period of time. They will look after that property well because it's suited to them, and there's a benefit for landlords of having a good tenant in a property for a long period. They're avoiding a void, they're avoiding a changeover of tenancy. So there's actually benefits to landlords of making those changes and supporting those tenants to stay in the property. So it's not something that we've seen specifically, but I think also because the numbers are quite small in terms of the proportion who are actually letting adapted properties at the moment, it's hard to draw strong conclusions.
Yeah, I mean, kind of from the list of kind of opinions on that one side, it looked like kind of if the landlord is making the application and controlling the works and using their own builders and specifying what was put in, then that could make a potential difference. So yeah, kind of the application of landlord applications. Yeah, more landlord applications would seem to potentially help the situation, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think landlords may not be aware that that's an option for them. There's also, we didn't actually see that much difference in terms of the proportion of landlords who self-manage and the proportion who use agents who are letting to adapted properties. But I think there is a difference in terms of how a tenant approaches that with an agent versus a landlord directly, and it can be more difficult to potentially have that conversation indirectly with a landlord via an agent. So that's also something to bear in mind.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you, Mira. I know you got to shoot off, but do appreciate you joining us this afternoon, and thank you for giving us the update from the NRLA. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So,
Foundations Live.
So next up, I'm going to welcome Guy to the stage, guys from Accessible PRS. And I think you've been working with kind of various bodies, including kind of national trading standards around this new scheme for estate agents.
That's right. Yes.
So let me add your slides. Oh, let's go back to the start. There we go. It's always best to start from the beginning, isn't it? So over to you, Guy. Just give me a shout when you want to turn the slides on.
Amazing. Thanks, Paul. Thanks everyone for joining me. So I'm Guy Harris. I run Accessible PRS. And I set up about 5 years ago in order to catalyze accessibility and inclusion in the property sector. And so for me, that's a kind of a big dot joining piece, working with in different areas. So that's the PRS, it's agents, it's property portals, it's DLUC, it's NHS England, build to rent, so all manner, lenders. So it's about joining up. What do I have to do to make the housing more accessible? And really, I've got 3 key objectives. One is to increase the supply of accessible homes at scale, because as Mira was talking about, the adaptations piece is part of it, but we, broadly speaking, have a very inaccessible housing stock in the UK. The second is around the search processes and also the processes between where, say, there's a funding stream or an idea such as Hold, a shared ownership scheme for people with long-term disabilities, but actually to get keys in the door there are too many barriers in place, and so there's too few people accessing these routes. And the third is about within housing is changing or rewriting the narrative so that people understand why it's how it's relatable, why it's relevant, and why it's commercially beneficial. So I was seeing in that last piece that there's quite a bit of chat about landlords and what they do, what they don't do. And, there's an interesting, I think, media struggle going on there, because actually the government haven't been building social homes. We're about 1.4 million social homes short. So what I'm seeing is people who are in the PRS who are trying to rent privately, but actually they shouldn't be. They should have security of tenure, and they should have the affordable rents, and they should have homes, social homes. So there are lots of key issues, but critically the work, one of my work streams is with the estate agents and the property portals and the CRMs, so that sit between them. That's the platform that passes the information from one to the other. And so I've had some amazing work with some amazing clients, and so talking with working with Rightmove and Chesterton's and Savills and Jones Lang LaSalle and sort of some independents and smaller agencies as well. And what I see is they're only too happy to do things, and they work really well with it. And they, we're seeing some really big changes on the ground where people are searching for properties. I'm particularly interested in wheelchair users. I am a wheelchair user. I had a spinal injury 20 years ago. But because I started out in agency 25 years ago, like, I understand how the property sector works and what the constraints they face is. And so therefore, in terms of designing a process that works, we're kind of making headway. And so what Paul's referring to are what's called the material information updates. Material information is something that sits under national trading standards. It's the information that must be available on property listings so that you as a consumer can know what you're getting into, or know, when you're going to either buy or rent a property right from the start, that information is transparent and available. From my perspective, my work was always, how can I, given that we have an inaccessible housing stock, how can I do this? What needs to change, or what can we do? What's the low-hanging fruit that means we can start looking for property in a searchable and filterable way, and that gives the information? So Paul, if we can go on to the next slide. Okay, so number of things on here. Essentially, if you know that what the property portals present is they don't do that information. So petitioning Rightmove is a waste of time. It's the agents that provide the information, and they do it through these CRM platforms. What I'm looking for is what I call the 3 a.m. test. That is, can a person go online in the middle of the night and search and filter for the properties they need, and see from those property listings, is the information available? Can they be the first ones in the morning, as soon as the office opens, to book the first viewing? And that gives them much more equality of opportunity to find a property that works for them. There are lots of bits. So the material information updates is what trading standards have now said must be available. And if we go to the next slide, actually, Paul, sorry, I might skip around a bit. The guidance is very clear, and it's very pragmatic. So we can't suddenly have an accessible housing stock. So we have to work within the constraints of what we have and what property people can give, because they're experts in property and they're not experts in disability, and that's kind of key to the success of this. So there are 3 new property characteristics. Step-free access, that includes lifts, ramps, and level thresholds. wet room, which includes level access showers, and lateral living. Now, lateral living is really clearly defined, and it's about not excluding properties that may work as well as including properties that will work. So lateral living is any property with a kitchen, bathroom, living room, and at least one bedroom on the entry level. And we say entry level, not ground level, because you could have an upper maisonette or, a duplex in a block of flats. And so that since 30th of November, that information was released. Now the agents, CRMs, and property portals, because they all have to leap together, are doing that work. So if we go to the next slide, please, Paul. Rightmove. So I've worked in varying degrees with all the portals. Rightmove slightly went off and did their own thing, which in some ways is okay, in some ways slightly frustrating. So they created this list of property characteristics you can see on the screen before you, and sent out the guidance to all the CRM platforms. So to give you an example, in the UK, there's something like 24,500 agencies. There's hundreds of CRM platforms which all have their own way of delivering the information. So Rightmove's sort of receiving information via about 800 different feed types. So it was a slightly complex piece of work. So now, for example, the reason I find the Rightmove one slightly confusing is you can have, if I look at the list there, you've got ramped access and you've got step-free access. And so they're kind of the same things, but if an agent only clicks one of them because they don't really know how it works or what the difference is, then we create a sort of an error in the system where the same property might not appear in different categories, although it has different categories, and therefore educating the user about how to search for properties is also slightly complex. On the Market uses the Rightmove live data feed. I hope this isn't too technical. And so what that means is that they're waiting for Rightmove to implement this, which will be the end of Q2, so that's June this year. However, on the Market, we're really keen to do something to be proactive for accessibility. And so a couple of years ago, they used a thing of data enhancement, where if an agent had written certain keywords or phrases in the written description, then On the Market would capture that information, allocate an accessible features icon to the property listing. When you click on the icon, a little pop-up box would appear, and it would say, why it had allocated that feature. So we're in an in-between phase where agents are starting to get to grips with it. Different CRM platforms are doing the work. So, for example, a company called MRI, which does work with hundreds of agents, they've already implemented it. And then the property portals, by the time the property portals go live, so that there should already be properties to view, and that's why there's a slight gap in the timings. If we go to the next slide, please, Paul. Zoopla's handling it slightly differently, and so the way they have it is at the back end. So what where people enter the information, they've put in 5 new property characteristics. So they've got the 3, the step-free access, wet room, and lateral living. They've put in disabled features, which is slightly woolly, doesn't mean anything. That's likely to cause false positives in search results. And they've also put in wheelchair accessible. Now, where I give guidance to agents, I say that they should only be using this if the property is built to M43 Part B standards. So if that property is actually, according to planning, wheelchair accessible. The difference with Zoopla thinks that if you have too many filters, applicants won't, or website users won't use them. And so they, across the board, this isn't just to do with accessibility, have limited their filters. And the way they do it is with a key phrase search. And so when you're searching for a property, you as a searcher, you need to know what phrases or what words to put into the keywords and the box, and then that will bring up the properties. Paul, can you just go to the next slide? I'm just trying to remember if I've got the go to the next one. Sorry. Okay, so I'll come back to the other one, but what's really key about the key phrases and words, and it's a bit of a technical approach. When I was creating the solution to how we find properties in the PRS, there are loads of challenges. So, for example, if I were to say this beautiful cottage is accessible to the M4, that description, agents and searchers will know that's actually to do with location. The problem is the keywords accessible in M4 will then start producing false positives, which is a really frustrating experience when you're a disabled searcher. And so property platforms can't exclude listings because their clients, the agents, are paying them an absolute fortune to include them. And so the way we get around this and the way they get around it is to use standardized key phrases. So you can see some key phrases which all the agents and all the property portals are getting. If you use a key phrase, then what happens when you put it into, say, Rightmove will return the listings with that entire key phrase at the top of the listings before breaking the key phrase into smaller phrases and then finally into words. And so part of this whole evolution and this kind of change in this update will be to get the information across to the website users or the searchers so they understand how to help themselves. And so that QR code, which we'll come back to it, it's on a couple of slides later, that takes you to a page on my website, which I'm updating. And I'm about to produce some content, video content, just to make it extra clear. But there's a lot of information coming in quite a short space of time and the various updates. So that's the importance of the standardized key phrases. Paula, sorry, if we can just go backwards one slide. We have, what's really important about this work is that property experts are, they're experts in property. And so for me, the challenge has been to keep this fact-based so that they can so that we start to create an equality of opportunity. And that's a slightly more long-term strategy, because whilst the government is steadfastly refusing to level the playing field in terms of the homes we build via a planning route, which they're absolutely not going to do, we're stuck with this problem. So the aim of my work is to work with the industry, knowing their constraints, rather than to try and change anything, to ask them or expect them to do things which isn't possible to do. So they're property experts, they're not OTs, they're not anything else, so they can't define a property as accessible. Many of them don't have any clear understanding of the needs of a disabled person. Excuse me. What I do with my training is I take them through what they do need to know so that they can, when they get an applicant with accessible housing needs, they actually can work really well with that person, and they're already identifying properties. And so those people who are viewing the properties to take them on, to get the instructions, are talking with their negotiators who are working with the applicants, and they're having that conversation on a daily basis. So there's some big changes here. And the other thing we need to understand and remember is that those people who are doing the searching have to be responsible for their own decisions. And so we just need to be kind of help sort of clear about what is whose responsibility. So renters have their own responsibilities to make their own decisions, but they need the information in order to be able to do that, which is the agent's responsibility. Okay, let's go forward again. Sorry, jumping around here. And go forward again one more. So potential connections. So I think this is interesting because Paul's asked me to speak today. My work isn't really on DFGs, and I think that there are some overlaps and there are some massive gaps. So for me, one of the biggest gaps with the PRS and the Disabled Facilities Grants is, say, a lot of the work that Mira is doing is around people who live in their homes and want an adaptation, need an adaptation, and the process that's there to support that's where they already live in the homes. My issue is that I have a lot of wheelchair users who simply cannot find a home to live in. that meets their needs. And the DFG is, whilst the Constitution is set up to allow for this, on the ground it doesn't. Because if you want to put an offer in on a property and then you say, well, I need to apply for a DFG, I need to get this works done, that whole process could take anything between 6 to 18 months. The first thing the landlord's going to say is, well, you know, or the agent is, okay, so who's paying, you know, are you putting an offer in on the property now, and who's paying for the rent all the time you can't live in the property? And then there's so many unknowns in the process and the timings and whether it's going to be granted and who's paying and how much it's going to be, that on the ground it's virtually impossible. So I find this a really frustrating business in that respect, because I know that we could be doing this in a cleverer way if we could do some joined up thinking between local authorities and private landlords and, you know, me, for example. I tend to find that whilst I can deliver solutions, I've got a whole box full of them. Local authorities will work in a very blinkered way because they're overwhelmed with the workload they've got and they can't really think about doing something new or putting up their heads above the parapet. So it's a kind of own goal in that respect. So that's the difference between an existing and a new tenant. Mira touched on this, and this is another really important point, is that actually every time we make adaptations to a property, the idea of ripping them out again and somehow making good is complete nonsense. But then if a DFG only allows for the cheapest bidder, the problem is, like, for the private landlord, that's their property and they want it to look as beautiful as possible. It's the same for the agent. So I see the difference between, say, agents who don't understand it and devalue properties with accessible features, and agents who totally get it, who promote it based on those merits. So the industry is just going through a learning curve at the moment. But a lot of this, if you put in cheap, clinical, ugly adaptations, that doesn't help. You know, if you do a nice job and it's perfectly possible to do this, then we go to the agents that know about this, and with the new features or property characteristics on the property portals and on websites because of the material information update, then actually, I mean, the whole thing is coming together so that we're matching the supply and the demand, or the properties and the applicants. Demand is a really fascinating question, and I come across this every week. So Mira talking about her landlords who don't see the demand. There are a whole host of reasons for this. Essentially, every little bit in the industry doesn't join up. A lot of people with a demand, they don't have options, they don't have choice. They've had a soul destroying, sometimes many years, looking for a property. They give up, they stay put, accepting that the unsuitable that they know is better than the unsuitable that they don't know. So it's a really interesting area. And whilst everyone here on the ground totally gets there's a huge demand, that isn't it. It's in a little space, and so part of my work is getting everyone else to go, oh right, okay, there's a demand, great, let's do something about it and make it relatable. Need for tenants to educate themselves. I think, you know, we all have a shared responsibility. So I have a responsibility, tenants have a responsibility, agents and portals have a responsibility. And it's just about getting this information out and leveraging any channel to let people know what is happening, what amazing things actually are happening, although they're, you know, it's slow, it's turning a tanker. And so that we can scale this much faster. So for example, Zoopla and Rightmove, they're data analysts. Their whole business, forget property, they're data analysts. They take that data, they work out what it means, and they sell it to all sorts of clients. Now, all sorts of clients looks like private house builders. So if planning says, no, we're not going to force you to do something, but the Rightmove data says, hey, do you know there's 37% of searches include wanting a wet room, then those developers, they're going to start building it. And this is why the search terms and users using it correctly and asking for things via a search, that will start to be picked up, and it is a a means to change down the line, and I've designed it to be like that. And finally, I think I've mentioned this point already, aim for high quality works and aspirational design. We can do it. There's loads. So I work with Jack L. Runnels, and she's absolutely fabulous. And in all the work she does, she recommends certain products which makes them look like homes, not institutional or clinical settings. Next slide, please. So I think this is, I don't really separate between landlords. For me, if you are a property owner or you intend to be a property owner, then not considering accessibility is a very short-sighted goal. So with all the stats, and you guys know them, whether it's people with disabilities, whether it's our aging demographic. So by 2040, there'll be more people aged 65 and over in the UK than there will be of working age. Begs two questions: where are they going to live? Who's going to care for them? And given that the demand now is I mean, it's a nightmare now. That's going to be, I think, catastrophic, and some pretty horrible institutionalized care if we don't sort it now. So yes, longer term tenants, fewer voids. Just to give you an example of a lovely story with Knight Frank, one of the negotiators had a family with a disabled child. They'd been looking for, I think it was 2 years actually. The valuer was going out, they'd done training with me, so I had no part of this story apart from telling it in arrears. Landlord had inherited a property from their parents after they died. The parents had accessibility features such as a wet room and other things in the property, and he was starting to rip them out because he thought that's what he should do as a refurbishment. The Knight Frank agent said, could you just hold on? Let me go and talk to my negotiators. We've got, there is a huge demand for this sort of thing. The negotiator spoke to the negotiator, went back to the office. They were like, yeah, this looks absolutely perfect. Can we introduce them? Introduce them first before letting any of their other applicants have a go. The dad was absolutely thrilled, said, this is perfect. Put in an offer on a longer term. And because it was market, got nothing to do with exploitation. That property, it was a really racing market. So he was the first to get there. So he put in a higher than asking price. The landlord then refurbished it, but including more accessibility features at his own cost, and so it worked really well. Whenever I get asked the question about pricing with either private landlords or agents, is we're looking to treat these people the same as everyone else, and we're not looking to exploit them on pricing. And I've yet to get a private landlord that I've spoken with that has an issue with that. Mostly they come and find me because they're personally motivated and they really want to do something and they want to make a difference and be part of, part of change. So that they're a really interesting group of people, and there's lots out there, but they're still on a learning curve. And so that last thing on standard setting, that again is just to do with making sure that when we think about designs and when we think about work or updates that we make to a property, we want to aim for the higher standards, not for the minimum standards. Because when people aim for minimum standards, they usually fail to meet them anyway. And then there's just, upset because a landlord might say, well, I've done the works, but there isn't a demand. And it's like, yeah, you've done the works, but you've done them badly. And so I'm quite honest when I have that conversation with people. Paul, next slide, please. That's me. Great.
Thank you, Guy. That was really useful and really interesting overview of the new system. Got a lot of love for you in the chat, actually. So
that's nice.
Good comment there from Polis, and lovely speaker. It's so frustrating working in LAs with DFGs taking up to a year to process before the work starts.
It's a really interesting point. So local authorities, there's such a variety in local authorities, and whether it's public sector or private sector, like I go in, I'm a problem solver and a dot joiner, so I come in with a different angle already. I'm the only person doing what I do. What for me, my challenge is to find the champions within any organization, and so around Hold, say, which is an incredible scheme, and there's some great stuff in the pipeline. But it's about finding, I have a local authority that I'm working with that are looking to pioneer some very innovative stuff, and then we'll share it more broadly. and we can scale it that way, you know. But they're a kind of a hen's tooth. Most local authorities, people are scared to try anything new because they've been burnt on experiments in the past, or they don't think their job's worth it, or they don't, you know, or they're just doing their job. And the directive they've had from the leadership team is your job is X, and so me coming in with Y is a problem for them. We just have to keep moving forwards, and the faster we can increase that rate of change, the better.
Absolutely, absolutely. One of the things I was kind of interested in when I saw this was that the regulator of social housing has also put a requirement on social landlords to keep better records of their adapted stock. Do you think kind of the methodology that's now being used by, or will be used by, kind of Rightmove would equally kind of work, or could be the basis of a scheme in the social rented sector as well?
I mean, short answer, possibly. Longer answer. So the freedom of information research that Aspire did quite a few years ago now showed that local authorities, they asked how many wheelchair users you've got on your waiting list, and how many wheelchair users, wheelchair accessible properties do you have under your control? And there were three kind of sets of, or three buckets of responses. One was no response. One was yeah, we don't keep the data. And then there was a small sort of group that said, yeah, we've got the data and it doesn't look very good. It's going to take, I think it was in excess of 26 or 40 years to clear the backlog, provided that no one else joins the list, which of course they're joining the list all the time. The difference is, if you don't have the data, you can't acknowledge the problem or solve the problem. And so one local authority, for example, I work with, when I spoke to them first time, introductory chat, they had no idea of the data. A year and a half later, they know it at a very granular level. That means that we can go out specifically, because one of the issues with the local authorities is, and why you find it so frustrating working with them, is they don't talk to each other. And so post-COVID, somewhere like Milton Keynes realized they had a homelessness issue and COVID was really going to impact it. So the way they solved it was an interdisciplinary approach. So they booked a room and they talked to each other. They found that worked really well, surprise, surprise. So they've continued to do it afterwards. What we need is that interdisciplinary approach in to do with accessibility. But also, I educate local authorities on some primary legislation that came into force in 2015 around best value as opposed to highest cost. And, it was actually a radical Tory. I don't want to get party politics. I don't, they're all, I'm following up on frustrations from all of them. But there is some amazing stuff which people don't know about. And so, my job is to try and pull a whole load of different things together, pilot it, show them how they can solve their own problems and own their own problems and have security of tenure for, ongoing without selling the family silver. So yes, we need the data is a shorter answer, Paul. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I think kind of your point about kind of the quality and design of adaptations is kind of well made across the board, because I suppose kind of picking up that last point, there's a difference between price and value for money, and
every time
it as cheap as possible isn't often good value for money, I don't think.
On that one, what's really interesting, so I wrote an article for RICS recently, Chartered Surveyors, about material information updates and various things, and I wanted to use a quote or to quote some Savills research, and they said to me, Guy, that's from 2015. It's a bit old now. And I'm like, this is the point, right? That research was absolutely on the nail, and nothing's changed, and it's still as relevant today. And what they were saying is, why are older people holding on to big family homes, with all these bedrooms when they don't need them? And what the research showed was that, well, one massive reason is they've got nowhere accessible and aspirational to downsize to, because we're not building it. This is part of the narrative. This is understanding what we need.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so thank you, Guy. I think you're going to have a lot of people visiting your website and the link over the next.
Please do get in touch. Send me an email. I love what I do, and there's lots of really exciting stuff going on at the moment.
That came across there. Yeah, we'll definitely be following up. And thanks for joining us this afternoon.
Thanks, Guy. Paul.
Foundations Live.
So, moving on to our next presenter of the day, I'm going to welcome Stuart from AKW, who's going to give us update on share pods, I think, Stuart.
Yes, that's right. You brought up my presentation. That was a great presentation, by the way, Guy. That's a tough act to follow, that one.
There we go. I'll add your slides to the stage. So,
okay, there we go. Excellent. So, yeah, I'm Stuart Fern. I'm the Regional Director of Sales for the South for AKW. Thanks ever so much for the opportunity, Paul, to do the presentation, and I hope it's of interest. We just want to really, I mean, it ties in quite nicely, I think, with some of the points that have already been raised today, but we just want to address some of the main concerns regarding bathroom adaptations that landlords will come across. So we're talking about sort of the installation of a wet room or level access shower. So some of the concerns that we look at there, the first one is damaging the fabric of the bathroom. I mean, ripping out a standard bathroom to replace it with a level access shower can involve digging into the floor for drainage. It could be tiling new areas, removing existing, channeling into walls for rerouting pipework. And it's also quite common to see, maybe a full refurbishment scheme done with a landlord only for the bathroom to be ripped out a couple of weeks later because an adaptation is needed in there. And unfortunately, due to the nature of some of the tenants that that are involved, some of those properties, might need reverting back to standard bathrooms within a short period of time. There's also that standard clinical, institutionalized looking wet room. They're seen as less appealing and can impact the tenant choice as well when looking to relet, when the landlord's looking to relet the property. It's very, very time consuming. So wet rooms can take up to 10 days to install. You've then got all of the whole sort of grant process to go through with that. On top of that, the time to survey, the time to gain approval, and the impact that the shortage of trades at the moment is having. So it's difficult to get the right people in to do the work. And that leads then to costly delays. Water damage. I mean, if fitted correctly, then wet rooms are pretty impervious to water damage. However, it's always considered a risk, both by the landlord and the tenant. And you're obviously reliant on the, getting the right standard of contractor in to do the work and making sure they are a high standard and extremely competent in what they're doing. And then all of that really, leads to the landlord being hit in the pocket, both by the cost of the install and the lost rent while waiting for a wet room for the process to sort of go through. So how can AKW help some of those concerns? We have a product called the Onyx Care Pod. We launched this a few years ago now. You can see on the left there, we have a typical fixed permanent adapted DFG bathroom, which can reduce the reletting appeal. And on the right, we have two different options with our Care Pod. So the top one is what we call a BOSI, which is a bath out shower in. So you take a bath out, you have already all of the services there, available. So you're using the same waste from the bath, you're using the same electrics for the shower, that sort of thing. And then we have also a palliative care option as well, where an accident or an illness means the stairs aren't necessarily accessible. So it might be into a lounge or a front room. So what is the Onyx Care Pod? Well, it's a standalone shower cubicle. It's totally structurally sound, so you don't even have to attach it to the walls. It can be freestanding in the middle of the room if you want to. We do it in a wide range of sizes, so either that's a bath replacement size or a larger size we have for wheelchair users as well. It also makes it easier to sort of survey. So, if you're going to a property, if you can fit in the footprint of the tray, then you can fit in the cubicle. So really, really easy to specify. We have a lifetime warranty on the cubicle. So all of the components in the cubicle have a lifetime warranty. We also give a 5-year free of charge warranty on the shower and 7 years on the pump as well. And wallboards can, add to the life expectancy in the way that they're actually easier to sort of keep clean and maintain. Sometimes you get with tiles where you might get mold or limescale or dirt build up in the grout lines and can be quite difficult for people to clean. So these are, very easy wipe clean option. We have a leak-proof design feature. The how do I go back? lent on my buttons. A unique leak-proof design feature. The frame is factory fitted to the shower tray, and then we have sort of metal uprights that support the wall panels. So really, quite simple to fix, and it also just gives that, it's very, very little chance of any water escaping unless you leave the door open when you're showering. Very high-end components, so it give a really aesthetically pleasing finish. So it's chrome, glass, nice looking products as well that are installed. Grab rails and shower seats, so they're installed there as standard if you want to. You can choose the products that go into it, but also they can be removed, which leaves that stylish non-adapted shower cubicle. It's minimum disruption. So as I said, sometimes up to 10 days to have a wet room installed. You can install an Onyx CarePod. A typical installation is 2 days to remove a bath and install the pod. So a really quick sort of turnaround on that. And cost-wise, we've had a large number now of DFGs where funding's been available for these products, and the cost works out, the same, if not slightly less than a conventional wet room, but you still get that same level of care. So 6 really simple steps to build it. You can see there the tray in the top right-hand corner. It's a low step 26mm tray. It's able to be ramped as well. We can supply a ramp with it. You can have the pod either as sort of half-height carer doors that open up fully, or you can have full-height glass doors, a stable door maybe that open halfway, so you can have a carer with it. But there's a minimal amount of components. Really, really simple to install. I've put one up myself before now, and it took about 40 minutes to get the frame up. So really, really simple. I said it was going to be very brief, so that's the details on it. Obviously, everything's available by our website. We're hoping this sort of covers the concerns, some of the ones I mentioned earlier, both private and social, who have the same challenges. It avoids those needs for the major changes, and hopefully it minimises disruption and lost letting income. Thanks ever so much for your time.
Great. Thanks, Stuart. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Foundations Live.
Okay, so for the last little section of today's show, perhaps I would run through some of the bits and pieces that we've put on our website recently for case law. So let me just share my screen there. So this is our Foundations website in its resplendent screen. So if you go into the library section, so you can either click on the library, it brings up this hover menu. So the case laws there, or if you click through to the library itself, get a kind of full page with all the links to all the bits. So it's this DFG case law section which is new, but I'm going to go through this afternoon. So quick disclaimer: this isn't legal advice. This is just our, I suppose, kind of interpretation of what the case law says. And there have been 6 cases that have been to the High Court in one way or another that have application to the kind of DFG process, or kind of DFG things that you need to know about. So I'll just run through those quickly in terms of date order. So we'll start back in 1988, and some of these cases are, I suppose, kind of well known for certain elements of the decision, but some of them do have some of the interesting bits and pieces in them that was important for you to know, because these, I suppose, after legislation and after guidance, they are kind of very important in terms of the way that DFG should be processed and things you should know about in terms of how you approach those, particularly working for local authorities. So the first one was Mohammed versus Birmingham from 1998, and for all of them, just got some kind of key points at the top, and if you follow the link, it will take you to the full judgment that was kind of published at the time, if you want to read the full judgment. But this kind of first one, it was a DFG that was applied for, and the housing department kind of refused it, and it was an application for around a kind of a heated treatment room, and basically kind of providing heating for a room where dialysis was needed. and the local authority refused, basically refused the application. But it wasn't that bit that was kind of particularly at the issue of this one. The council agreed to go back and relook at their decision. But what they said was that when they looked at their decision, they were taking into account how much money they got and their available budget when they were going to come to their next decision. And the judge basically said, hold on a minute, you can't do that. So basically what the judgment that came out of this particular case was that when you're looking to make a decision about DFGs, you can't take your budget into account, that it's a mandatory grant, so it's very important for disabled occupants to meet their conditions, and that his view was that Parliament would have been aware of the financial constraints on local authorities, and the kind of particular clause in terms of reasonable and practicable only relates to the age and condition of the dwelling rather than the authority's financial resources. So basically the judge was saying if Parliament wanted to change how public expenditure is allocated, then it would do so through the legislation, and it wasn't for local authorities to do so through their processing of DFGs. And the local authorities are basically obligated to approve DFGs for Section 23 purposes, regardless of financial implications. So I guess kind of basically I suppose kind of similar to the way many local authorities have the issue with kind of like social care or homelessness. Kind of DFG falls under a similar category in terms of it's something that has to be funded. Although I guess in practice that isn't always the case. So that was the case of M versus Birmingham back from 1998. So the next case was in 2003, and this featured Calderdale. And this one's actually a two-part case. So the first part was in 2003. And this case involved Mr. and Mrs. B and their 4 children. Tenants lived in a council house. Oldest son disabled with dyspraxia and Asperger's, and shared a bedroom with his brother, and used to kind of fight at night and lack of sleep and disruption during the night. And family wanted an extra bedroom so that the siblings could sleep apart and basically get a good night's sleep. So in the first case, after the council said that wasn't something they would give a grant for, so basically the family wanted a grant to convert their loft. But the defence basically from the council was that even if they provided the extra room in the loft, it still wouldn't make the home safe, because the brother would still have kind of behavioural issues elsewhere in the house. So they felt that it wasn't less inappropriate to provide the extra room to make it kind of safer at night. And in the first case, the judge basically agreed with that. The law should make the home safe rather than just safer. But they did kind of accepting that safety is a tricky concept. But basically, the court in the first case sided with the council and found no reason to overturn the decision. So that went to appeal in 2004. So basically, it was the same, same basic facts on this particular case. But what kind of the judge said in the appeal was that you can't have safe as an absolute term. You can't make a home entirely safe, and that the kind of emphasis of the grant in terms of making the home safe should actually be making the home safer, and that by providing the additional bedroom in the loft, that would clearly make the home safer than it is now. In fact, he said that safety is a relative concept, and you would never make it totally safe. The council still argued their position that it should make it safe, but the judge said that, that making the home safer is fine, and the loft extension would do that. So it's the application of this case is that making a home safe is actually making a home safer. And it did also look at the way the decision was made by Calderdale. So there are the two bits of the test: necessary and appropriate, and reasonable and practical. Once you've decided the purpose, and it was just making it clear that you look at the purposes first, and then look at necessary and appropriate, reasonable and practical after that. But kind of the key bit of this one was making the home safer, not entirely safe. So another case from 2004. So this was a lot of case law going on, but this wasn't actually a DFG case. This was a case where parents had been awarded a grant to, I assume kind of back in 2004, it would have been 25,000, I guess, for an extension, and that it was the social services department that were looking at whether they can, should, must offer a top-up, and whether they could take the parents' income into account when they were making a decision on whether to offer that support to the parents in terms of a top-up. So the details are there if you want to read the kind of further details of the case. But what the basically what the decision came to at the end of it was that, yes, that there are duties under the Chronically Sick and Disabled Persons Act and the Children Act for authorities to provide kind of top-ups for adaptations, but they can take into account the parents' financial resources when they're making their decisions. So I guess to a certain extent that there's a potential for means testing if social services look to top up funding under the Chronically Sick and Disabled Persons Act. Okay, coming up to date, there weren't any more cases for another 16 years after that. So the next one came along in 2020, which featured Islington. And you probably heard me talk about this case quite extensively in the past. But there are quite a lot of details to it. So again, it's worth a read. But it was basically Mrs. McEwen lived in a kind of property where the front door was some way below the pavement level, and she wanted a step lift installed in front of the property so she could get from the pavement down and into the property and kind of access her home. So basically, Islington refused this particular grant on a number of reasons. So firstly, they said the application wasn't complete because planning permission and other bits and pieces hadn't been included as part of the application. They said that the cost might exceed £30,000 and that they weren't sure that Mrs. McEwen had the funds to cover costs over £30,000. They said that they didn't feel that the step lift on its own was sufficient to make the property accessible for her to live in, and that other modifications were needed, such as to a bathroom and kitchen. They felt that there could be additional costs that hadn't been included in the application for to ensure compliance with building regs and to remove earth necessary to install the lift, although that was disputed. They also said that there was a much better property for Mrs. McEwen. I think it's about a mile or so away. It would be much better for her to move to, so she would need to move. And I suppose in terms of no blind check, they were concerned that this is going to be quite an expensive job and that Mrs. McEwen wouldn't have the costs to contribute towards it. So the judge went through all of that, and some of this I think is slightly difficult in terms of the way that Islington, in my opinion, is they didn't put up a great defence to this particular case, but we are where we are. So the claimant argued that their application didn't cover every single cost, but they kind of felt that that those are their responsibilities anyway. So it's no not reason for them to be rejected. They felt that they should be able to choose which adaptations that they wanted without having to do everything that was possible. That they would have to comply with building regs, so not having it at that point should be a reason for denying the grant, and that they felt that the council hadn't really investigated whether they got the extra money or not, and it wasn't really their concern, and they definitely didn't want to move. So what the judge said was that, and this is probably the kind of the key bit, is that when you're looking at the different purposes for which a grant must be approved, you must only really focus on that particular purpose. So in this case, the purpose was gaining access to the property through the step lift outside the property, and that even though Mrs. McEwen may not be able to use the kitchen or the bathroom or other aspects of the property, the judge said that wasn't applicable to making the decision about the step lift. I'm not sure I agree with the next bit in terms of judge pointed out that planning permission structural surveys could be handled as preliminary or ancillary charges. There's other preliminary and ancillary charges, such as the getting quotes off the builders and things like that, which you would need to do to put in a grant application. So I'm not quite sure that actually followed, but that's what the judge said in the judgment. Also said that an applicant could put in an application up to £30,000, then it was up to them to find the rest of the money if it costs more than that. It's if you think that they can't afford it, that's not a valid reason to reject a DFG. And also he said that you can't deny a grant simply because you think they should move to a more accessible home, and he considered that an unlawful reason to give a refusal. So basically the judge pretty much tore apart Islington's defence and asked him to go back and redetermine the case. So there's quite a lot in that one, but I think the key, probably the two key ones that come out of it were whether it's a tenant, whether it's an owner, you can't, just because there's another property that's available, that's not a valid reason to refuse a grant, and that the kind of principle that different purposes should be dealt with separately is also a key point from the Islington case. So finally, just to wrap up for the afternoon, the final bit of case law was from Redbridge. This one was from 2022. And again, there's quite a lot in there if you actually read the full judgment. But it was in this particular case, it was a 30-year-old man with profound and multiple disabilities that still lived with his parents. And they'd had a through-floor lift fitted back in the property in 1997. It had been replaced in 2015, and another had been fitted in 2022. But in July 2021, they had some particular difficulties with the lift when they couldn't get him kind of back upstairs to his bathroom and bedroom. And reading some of the details, it looked like they wrapped him up in a duvet and kind of dragged him up the stairs in a duvet to get him back into his bedroom. And Health OT went and looked at the situation and basically agreed with the family that it would be necessary. It's considered it necessary and appropriate to fund a stair lift as a backup solution. This went through to the housing team at the local authority, who said, well, that very well, that may be necessary and appropriate, but as the housing authority, we don't think this is reasonably practicable. They also said that you can only have one piece of equipment to cover each purpose. So you've already had a 3-floor lift, so you can't have a stair lift. They raised concerns about the use of a stair lift for this particular person, that and kind of pointed out that a similar option of a stair lift was ruled out some years ago on safety concerns, and that a robust warranty and 24/7 call-out service was a much better contingency plan, and that it wasn't particularly good value for money to fund a stair lift when a warranty and a call-out service was a better option. The family didn't agree with this, so it did go through again to judicial review. So the judge made a few comments or kind of judgments on this particular case. Firstly, that the purpose, the grant for the stair lift was being made was to make the dwelling safe or safer, as we saw on the earlier case, not providing access to a bedroom or bathroom, which was the purpose of the 3-floor lift. So he kind of batted back the option that you can have one piece of equipment per purpose. But the main bit was around this kind of necessary and appropriate kind of part of the decision. And if we kind of just go back to the key point at the top, Redbridge stated that the role of the OT in the DFG assessment is to determine what is necessary and appropriate, and the role of the home improvement team is to determine what is reasonable and practicable. Well, as we've seen on kind of one of the previous cases, what's reasonable and practical only relates to the age and condition of the dwelling. So in this case, once the local authority had accepted the lift was necessary and appropriate, all they could refuse to under reasonable and practicable was the age and condition of the dwelling, and the age and condition of the dwelling was fine. So that kind of shot them in the foot in terms of this particular case. And what I think it really means is that necessary and appropriate decision takes on much more significance, and it's not just the role of the OT to make that determination. It's actually the grants officer that determines what is necessary and appropriate, informed by the OT's assessment, and maybe in some cases the property, it wouldn't be reasonable and practical because the age and condition of the property, but it is that bit around necessary and appropriate that needs to be the main driver of the decision. So that's the kind of six main cases that exist for DFGs that just rattle through them quite some place there, because I'm conscious of time and get finished for 3:30, but they're all on the website now in the library section. So well worth a read if you kind of only read the summaries, but if you've got a rainy day sometime, actually reading through the original judgments is it's very informative as well. Right, so that's just about 3:30, so it brings us around about to the end of the day. Just a reminder that we start the DFG Champions Facebook group. So that's got, I think, about 2,700 members from across the country now. So if you're interested in continuing some of the conversations from today, I'm sure there'll be some discussion of those over there. But thank you to Mira, Guy and Stuart for joining us this afternoon and sharing their knowledge and expertise. I think we've had a really good discussion around the private rented sector in particular this afternoon. So thank you all for that, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon and being so active in the chat this week as well. Coming soon, we've got, as I said, at the start of the Foundations Live Show, we've got the summit coming up on the 27th of June. So that's all about DFGs for children. So that's your area of work and expertise. It'd be great to see you in June on the 27th. We've got one final DFG Champions Roadshow of the current tour in Manchester next Tuesday. And that's sold out, so if you haven't already got a ticket, sorry, it's full. But it'd be good to see you, because we're doing more roadshows in the autumn. So we'll be visiting, if I can remember them all off the top of my head, we'll be visiting Colchester, London, Wolverhampton, Liverpool, Sheffield, and Southampton, I think. But we'll be all across the country with brand new roadshows in the autumn. We've got more Foundations live events coming up some next month. We've got some academic research, and the authors of a new book on how to deliver home adaptations will be presented to us in May. And then in June, we'll be looking at different types of system builds and different ways of providing extensions, which I think will be a really interesting session. I've also got some quantity surveyors coming along who are going to talk about how you can really quickly and easily estimate the cost of an extension or kind of a major adaptation, so you can build that into your kind of planning process in the very early stages. So the Foundations, national body for self-facilities grants and home improvement agencies England, funded by the Department of Pleasant Communities, here to help with events, training, and have a team of regional advisors who are available to answer any questions that you may have, and do so almost all day, every day. So you can find out all the details on our website at foundations.uk.com. So that's all for this week. Thank you all for joining us. Hope you found it useful. You'll get an email with a link to the give us your feedback and get your free CPD certificate, which is always good to hear what you think. And thank you for joining us. We'll see you